Being a single parent in Canada is one of the greatest indicators for poverty that we can see. Actually, the Institute of Marriage and Family Canada, where I work, estimated the cost of family breakdown through the increased spending on welfare and housing and childcare, and that came to, at a conservative estimate, $7 billion annually. So I find sexual liberals fail to acknowledge that. For the most part, they fail to acknowledge that social spending is the result of family breakdown and not a solution that will build families back up. Sexual liberals see no reason to constrain sexual behavior and certainly would never draw any extension from a personal, private life to the public square. I believe there is a connection, and the reality is that private acts do have public consequences outside of this talk. We see it. One woman can abort her baby girl privately, but a nation doing so, for example in China, amounts to a public crisis, something that we are grappling with right now, what to do with all the extra men. One woman can sleep with her boyfriend, but when most women do, what changes in the way that we do relationship? And so I would argue quite strongly that all of these small private acts amount to a cumulative effect on our communities and our culture and the way that we live. Since this is theology on tap, I will add that people of faith are more likely to be able to take off our radical feminist glasses in order to see what the world as it is rather than as some would like it to be. So while Gilder's message that men and women are different may come as a surprise to secular people, I think that people of faith will be in a better position to see where he is right as compared with other theories out there, for example, the theories of radical feminists. The other side note might be that there is room for abuse of Gilder's thesis. Someone might legalistically try to come up and say women shouldn't work or some such nonsense. I think that people of faith are better prepared to cope for the thesis as it is, because we'll always be leaving room for God to be working in how we live our lives, and we'll always be searching for a calling, and that this calling, this search for what God would want from us and what God would have us do will always take precedence over statistics or scientific theories or social scientific theories, and for this I am very, very grateful, even if I never say it publicly in my work or in the media. I did get this one quote from a fellow Christian who works in the social science field, and he said, "Statistics are to the Christian analyst what the lamppost is to the drunkard, support rather than illumination." So if you replace statistics with social science theories, I think the same thing applies. I think if we take off our radical feminist lenses, which to be perfectly honest I was raised wearing at my all-girls high school, I don't think we're actually looking into a controversy at all. We're looking at a clear call for higher standards, not lower ones, for both men and women. And I believe that when healthy masculinity is established as the norm, women have greater freedom to lead healthy, fulfilling lives. And this gets at the idea that a strong, secure man will not be threatened by a working woman or by temporary unemployment or by any of the other things that life throws his way. So this is a call for men and women to work together to create the civil society that we all want to live in. And marriage improves those outcomes for men and women, and as an institution provides for the underpinnings of a democratic civil society. Without social bonding, we can't have a civil society, and without marriage, we are at risk of losing social bonding. Therefore, strong communities always start with strong families. I do hate to end a talk about men by returning to women, but since we're all connected in the end, the decrease in the stature and strength of marriage through the sexual revolution and no-fault divorce and other factors has steadily distanced women from long-term ambitions of what really matters, things like family and marriage, and has simultaneously had this damaging effect on the status of men. Gilder writes, "Marriage is the key to the connection of fathers to this central process in the creation of life and the production of wealth. The golden rule and perennial lesson of marriage is, give and you will be given unto. It is the obvious message of motherhood, but societies thrive only to the extent that this maternal wisdom becomes as well the faith of fathers. The driving force of a free economy is not material resource or even physical capital, but the metaphysical capital of family and faith." So we can debate whether this thesis is right or wrong, is true or false. But I think my main point tonight might simply be to ask people not to dismiss the idea simply because it is politically incorrect. Thank you very much. Okay. So we have some questions. I'll read the question and then I'll see if I can come up with an answer. Has single women using contraception lowered women to the level of men, i.e. short-term? And I would say absolutely yes. I don't know that there's any single other factor that would be as huge on the scene of changing the way that we consider our fertility as women and how we conceive of it. And somebody who is in the post sexual revolution era, who's born, I'm born in '76, you don't know anything different. So you don't know how huge the shift was. I can't compare. I do recall once being asked, this was sort of a couple of years ago, and I hadn't actually rejected the sexual revolution, and this woman asked me, she said, when did you reject the sexual revolution? That was the first time I ever had an inkling that something happened that I was supposed to reject. So you can see how it's very embedded into the way we think, and I think the birth control pill is a huge factor in changing the way that we live our lives. You can't get around that, and it's interesting because not everybody, some really great voices. I know Kay Heimowitz came and spoke at an Institute of Marriage and Family Canada conference, and she was asked that same question basically, and she said no, she didn't think that the birth control pill had played this great role. But I would have wanted to flesh that out with her a bit to figure out why on earth she would say that, because I think it definitely has. The next question is, what is your opinion on gender-based analysis for the development of government programs? Do you believe all programs should be for both genders, since you appear to not believe in what is happening at Status of Women Canada? Or do we need more programs for men? Yeah, I remember when I first read about gender-based analysis, and I would be against the concept of reviewing. What it means is that the government would review policies and programs from a gendered perspective and from how that would affect, I assume in theory, how it would affect both genders, but it seems to be put forward largely by feminists, so I'd assume they'd be more concerned with how it would affect women. I definitely think that if we want any lens on our policies and practices in government, that it should be a family lens and not one that prioritizes men over women or women over men. So that's my opinion of gender-based analysis. What were the underlying reasons for the feminine or feminist movement in the 60s and 70s? Fears, power, trauma, experience? I think that's a great question, because if you read Betty Friedan and her writings and how violent they almost were towards a certain conception of femininity, home, motherhood, I mean, she was very successful and she garnered a lot of sympathy and support, and that didn't come from nowhere. So to answer this, to be fair, I would say I don't know, but certainly there seems to have been some sentiment on which some of the feminists in the early years capitalized. I would assume, if I looked into it, that it had to do with changing economy as well and changes in the way we lived and worked, but I would have to look into that more. So. Your presentation offers no positive views of men. Why? I think it offers very positive views of men, and I think it offers a sense that men are there as support in a family to women, and that women are there as support in a family to men. And that's the takeaway from anybody who sits on my side of the fence, that men and women are not separate and other from one another, but rather that we thrive. I thrive. Men are my brothers, my fathers, my husbands, whatever. We all are connected, interconnected, so where one thrives, the other does as well. So I don't think that's a valid takeaway from my talk, and I'll leave it at that. How to reduce the Canadian divorce rate? Just a second. Oh, wives initiative.